Hello and welcome back. Welcome back to Diverse Conversations. This is Ashka Patel. Thank you very much for joining me once again on this yet another episode where we're continuing our journey in exploring the Canadian pharmacy innovations landscape. Today, it's with great pleasure that I am here to speak with our guest, none other than Amy Lamb. Amy has been a frontline pharmacist for 10 years, working primarily in the independently owned community and compounding pharmacies, serving roles as pharmacy manager, compounding department head, privacy officer, and clinical consultant. Currently, she is the director of Northern Health for Heritage Health Group Incorporated, which operates a growing network of Saskatchewan pharmacies. Amy provides frontline pharmacy services with one of these pharmacies, WillowGrove Pharmacy Prince Albert, as well as providing clinical care to remote Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan. Amy is the owner and lead consultant of Lamb and Sage Personalized Health Solutions, a pharmacy practice consulting company that specializes in compounding, standards of practice development, and training for clinical pharmacists in the areas of hormones, traditional medicines, and functional medicine. Amy is a long-standing pharmacy and patient advocate, serving on the several pharmacy advocacy boards. As a Métis woman, Amy has been serving as the co-chair of the newly founded Indigenous Pharmacy Professionals of Canada organization and will become one of the organization's interim CEO in the near future. Amy also volunteers locally and is the chair of the YWCA Prince Albert Board of Directors. So it is with great pleasure that I get to have this conversation with Amy, where we'll be breaking down a lot of barriers, especially in her experience, along with her extensive experience in serving the Indigenous communities, and also the work that she is leading at the Indigenous Pharmacy Professionals of Canada. This is a great opportunity for us to explore, the health needs, but also what are some of the barriers and challenges that Indigenous population face as they're interacting with their profession, but also for all the Indigenous pharmacy professionals who may be facing as they enter our profession. So it is with great pleasure and a privilege that I welcome Amy to this conversation. All right, so we have Amy joining us today. Thank you, Amy, for making the time to be here with us and have this incredibly important conversation, where we will talk about the innovations that you have already, created, but also there are some innovative work that you're currently engaging in right now, and I would love to hear from that, from your thoughts on that as well. But before that, I just want to say thank you so much for making the time around the holidays. We're doing this, and I really appreciate that.
No problem. Happy to be here, Ashka.
Awesome. So, Amy, I always start this question off for all my guests, and I will love to hear your professional journey in terms of, how did you get started with pharmacy? And more importantly, how did you carve the path that you're on today?
I think I entered healthcare because I've always really felt a deep draw to caring and connecting with patients. I'm kind of a compassionate person, and I like old people, and that's it seemed like a good fit. But ultimately, I think that the path that I ended on after being a pharmacist and entering my career was really probably catalyzed by my personal health to start. I always say that it's like I started off my pharmacy career with my chronic illness being at its absolute worst. And I think that's often a factor that lots of pharmacists that are coming into practice are dealing with. Universities, a lot of pressure. I feel terrible for these poor kids that have gone through, the blend of, virtual learning and everything that's gone on during the pandemic. But that kind of stress and sort of the lifestyle is pretty hard on a person. And I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. I've got some near-death childhood trauma, some stress syndromes, and I'd always had a little bit of like mental health and sort of the behavioral consequences that come with that. So when I entered the profession, I was in pretty rough shape. And of course, I'd seen lots of doctors and got lots of prescriptions and almost a growing laundry list of diagnoses. And you do start to get the impression, even as somebody who's very trusting in the education that you received, you're like, I feel like we're kind of not dealing with the underlying current here. And so I don't know why I was privileged enough to end up on the pathway that I am, but I just ended up in a pharmacy eventually that had a very, it was a compounding pharmacy. It was a little bit more maybe natural focused, but it had a hormonal expert and I have a hormonal condition. So you can imagine just how valuable that was.
Yes.
And it, in getting, sort of a boost in my health, in having a better understanding of some of the environmental factors that impact hormonal stuff, it really came down to me recognizing that there is so much more by way of our comprehensive management of health that we could really dive into. And I just saw that pharmacists were obviously the right people to do so. We're kind of in a retail setting. Like before I was a pharmacist, I, worked at a sports store selling skis and stuff.
Wow.
I kind of get how you build a relationship and how you get to know somebody and you learn what matters to them from hearing their story. And so I've constantly sought out opportunities, made sacrifices, took some risks, ultimately, just so that I could continue to practice in that way. And I think that ultimately, because I started off with the worst health I could have been, my personal and professional development have gone like super duper hand in hand. I've sometimes let the professional learnings really catalyze, like, oh, this is really what I should be doing to get myself healthier, to get my perception changed, or to, find peace or rest or whatever. And then, personally, it's made me realize that, geez, there are some pretty unsafe spaces in pharmacy. And I need to protect myself. And if I don't necessarily think that I'm being able to share my knowledge or my experience with my patients, then I needed to find other ways to do that too. And so I've been in compounding pharmacies, always kind of leaning towards the independence, because I love being able to have a very candid and authentic conversation with the owner, somebody that takes me on as sort of this staff clinical hormone expert pharmacist, to be like, okay, like here's Amy's barriers, because I'm a really, really good pharmacist until I'm under a ton of stress or I'm in a toxic environment. And then, I just go into survival mode just like everybody else. And I'm not as sharp, I'm not as nice, and so I really fight for that. And that's where, I started doing private practice consulting. You realize that you need to have a really, really strong foundation to be able to offer something that's of that caliber. So I did my scholar phase where I let, between PCCA and the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine and eventually the Institute for Functional Medicine, dump something like 600 accredited hours of just like obsessive hormone training into me. And a little personally motivated, right? Like I certainly got a good sense of what I needed to do for myself, for my family, for my community and my patients, of course. And so after that, it was a blend of something that, I could kind of negotiate with employers. I didn't open my own consulting group until actually my first maternity leave. I'm just about to go on my second here, but I didn't open, a business about it until I was really operating kind of from a space where I was at home and on my own, because there's always, when you're really truly talking to somebody about comprehensive health strategies, for those that have financial limitations, we really focus on what's free and dietary stuff and lifestyle stuff and community supports. And for those who can afford it and kind of want an easy button, and those A-type women that just want to feel better right now, and they don't care how much money it's going to cost, there is a really sustainable model behind these kind of comprehensive health things. And so, I wear a lot of hats.
You definitely do.
and so I did get invited to be a part of a group of pharmacies or network of pharmacies that have been opened in Saskatchewan. And I think, as I progressed in my personal and professional understanding of how to support people's health, I really did start to have a little bit of wrestling with the ethics of how do I take what I know and what I know is really helping people, and how am I going to make that more broadly accessible, more affordable and sustainable and motivating, in the same way that I try to do that on a personal level with my clientele. And so being a part of an operator of a pharmacy network and kind of being honed in on one particular pharmacy. When you make a safe workplace,
Yes.
that's how you can help your community. There's one.
Absolutely.
And the other piece was recognizing that a lot of these foundations of health are already built in to the traditional culture and ancestry that is my own.
Yes.
And so empowering that back to the communities. And so I actually work as the director of Northern Health for our network. I've done a lot of visitation, spending a lot of time in remote Indigenous communities, because some of my pharmacy practice consulting is also for pharmacies, and I usually, do some compounding consulting or whatever. I did get a sense of, let's build operating procedures and tasks and tools that help in empowering communities that are struggling and don't have a whole lot of, like health support or health systems and stuff. And so been doing a little bit of that too. And then ultimately, you just, when I'm at the end of, and I'll never be at the end of my personal development, but I do feel like I'm on the other side of what was illness and what was, that loss and that hopelessness and that disparity that comes with chronic illness and, everything else that comes along with it. And I just want to share that. I kind of want to share that recovery. I just feel so drawn to be a part of communities and a part of doing something really great. And I always did pharmacy advocacy stuff. I've been on the Pharmacy Association of Saskatchewan and the Association of Compounding Pharmacies, and I was on CAPC all through school and everything. But it was time to support communities, and so I'm on my YWCA Prince Albert. I'm the chair of that board, and most recently IPPC. And so now, as of the start of December, and I know it seems like a really strange time to take on a new job, but hey, this is the cool thing about Indigenous communities, is that a woman who's about to give birth to a baby can also be the CEO of the Indigenous Pharmacy Professionals of Canada. So
wow,
here we are.
Truly leading by example is what I would say.
Yeah. And it's still a nod to understanding what my personal barriers and limitations are. Is I'm going to have a baby, but I'd rather be contributing to something that's so meaningful, and that organization's kind of captured my heart. And so I really think that that's how I'm going to spend my time at home instead of scrolling on the internet while I'm I'm caring for a child. But TBD. I also will see how life treats me here. I'm
sure we'll expect some great work coming out of IPPC, and I do want to discuss a little bit more about that. But maybe we'll stall that a little bit, because you touched on a few things, really great things, as you were telling us about your journey, and I want to make sure that we take an opportunity to unpack that a little bit first before we kind of jump into the IPPC, because I feel like that is a whole different conversation that needs to also happen.
Totally.
And I do want to spend some time on that as well. But when you talk about traditional medicine and functional medicine and pharmacy, and I think you did kind of elaborate a little bit on this when you were talking about it, but how do you balance those three different types of medicine and their philosophies as you're trying to help your patients? Because I'm sure like there are some commonalities, but then there's also potential differences. Like how does that happen?
Totally. And it becomes very, very patient led. Right. Ultimately, and I always say that it's like the best evidenced prescription in the world is pretty useless if the patient refuses to take it.
That's true.
So I'm pretty non-judgmental. I recognize that sometimes that foundation of trust is what is required to eventually to say to somebody, you really ought to be on Ramapril.
Right.
Like there's lots that we can do. We can get you on some vitamins, and we can help you with the lifestyle, and we can talk about food changes and diet changes, and we can coach you through those changes so that they're motivating and accessible. But ultimately it's understanding what a patient has available to them, and what is accessible and what is motivating. And like I said, I work with lots of northern communities that have had some pretty long-standing harsh consequences from forced interventions,
Yes.
from not trusting the person who is making those interventions. So,
Mhm.
it's listening to their perspective first, and really truly understanding it, and then just kind of guiding them through there. And then you just triage the evidence and the safety and the preference, and it is a lot.
Right.
I spend a long time with a person. I not only spend an hour with them, but we do 3 months of follow up.
Mm.
Just checking in to be like, is that working? Is it
Right.
both effective? Like, are you tolerating it? Is it just completely impossible and you keep forgetting? How can I coach you to remember? Or are you just not doing that because you don't really want to? And so what can we do instead? And it was really empowering to be trained in functional medicine and in kind of lifestyle medicine, and start to understand all of those concepts, because I just feel like I have a really big toolkit.
Yes.
I have a lot of options, and I can say to somebody, well, if that doesn't work, I guess we'll try something else.
Right.
Because it's really truly about you. It's not me saying you have to do this or you're going to die, and hopefully we really found such a good relationship that by the time a conversation like that has to happen, they go, all right, okay.
Yes, I'm trusting you.
I'll super duper take that warfarin because I probably should. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. And,
Yes.
I've got patients who, they are like strictly natural vegan patients who ended up getting, 2 bare metal stents. And it was just sort of the way it ended up going. And they have to be on warfarin. And they're like, this person tells me I can't have vegetables, but that's all I eat. So,
Wow.
you really kind of have to get down to, it's like, navigating that. It was the first time since probably, internships that I really did, weekly tracking of INRs with somebody, and, the 10% dose changes at the same time as navigating, dietary recommendations, looking at her lifestyle. It was like, recognizing that even, she had to speak at a funeral, she had to do a eulogy, and all of a sudden everything went way off the charts because she was under stress and she was eating funny. And, it's a fun challenge. And I really believe that, I may have gone a bit overboard, I think, in my own training. And maybe that's because it's like hormones are really weird and they are really complex. But I think all pharmacists can do this without any additional training. Like, we're all researchers, right?
Yes.
You can pretty much go, and somebody gives you a question and they give you a diagnosis you've never heard of before.
Yes.
It's like, never heard of that. Okay, cool. But you can look at it, and you can look at its antecedents, and you can look at, it's got elevations in interleukin-6. And what does that mean? And are there complementary or dietary interventions? Like, there are dietary interventions that lower interleukin-6.
Absolutely.
So you can say to somebody, hey, I know, we just kind of want to do a bunch of nice things for your health. And ultimately, like I said, it always comes down to these foundations where they're just eating a little cleaner, they're taking a little bit more rest, they're moving, they're drinking water, and it's good.
Exactly. I mean, you have touched on some really, sometimes often forgotten elements of, how we provide healthcare, right? Which is putting the patient in the center of it, and having the patient dictate how their care should be provided, and taking their values and philosophy, but also at the same time building trust. And I think, the times we live in today, we know more than ever before how critical that trust is, to have some of the toughest conversations that we as healthcare providers have had to have during the entire course of the pandemic, even to today. So, thank you for sharing that. And I think my next question, as I observe all this information, is, how did the uptake happen once you started providing these services? Like, what was the patient feedback and patient response like? And what gave you the confidence to then move ahead and say, let me get more, let me focus on this part of practice, because this is something that's a need in the community, and this is what patients are seeking.
So the first patient that I did a true consultation for, she came in and she had lichen planus. So that's, it's like autoimmune weird skin condition. It's like, you look it up and they're like, we don't really know what causes it, but it's going to be these horrible, kind of raised rashes all over somebody. Wow. And I just as her community pharmacist, asked her a couple prompting questions, and she ended up kind of breaking down over the fact that she'd been given, a prescription for 30 grams of cream that was $110, and it wasn't going to be covered. And she was like, this is progressing really quickly. Like, this is systemic. And this guy is, I've seen internists, I've seen dermatologists, I've seen endocrinologists. I don't know what's going on, but she'd had like a really horrible traumatic health incident. So I, all I'd said was like, did something really like significant happen leading up to this? And she just goes, yes. And nobody's asked me about this. And so I looked at this as she actually did have there were some hormonal changes, there was some stress stuff going on, she had some nutritional insufficiencies, and ultimately, like I said, she just said, I need you to help me. I need you to sit down and do this. And I don't care how much money it costs, and I don't care what it is. I just want you to sit down and help me. So I did. And I spent a pretty significant amount of time, certainly not a sustainable amount of time, for what I asked her for, and made some recommendations that I was quite confident in, but were still a really big blend of comprehensive health strategies and a little outside of, your conventional pharmacist scope.
Right.
And she'd been dealing with this for 2 years, and in 2 months it was gone. Wow. And so, so that's a little motivating in itself. And then I get a letter from SCPP, so the regulatory body here in Saskatchewan, which always gives you a little bit of heart palpitations. But, and it was actually just a forwarded letter that she had sent to the college, sort of saying that, like, this person changed my life. Like, you need to encourage pharmacists to be this, to find time to care for this, because it's like this, I saw specialists for 2 years. I took everything and nothing helped until somebody actually sat down and listened to me. And that was your pharmacist. And so, from that point forward, it's kind of been like that, where, the people that I see, I was really at first quite confident that I could help them, and that I had the time to help them. I had the time to research, that I felt competent and confident enough. And I had mentors that I could reach out to and things like that. But it has just sort of blown up that way. And I don't really do a lot of marketing. I actually do a lot of marketing for other things, but I don't do marketing really when it comes to these hormone consultations much, because the referral rate is high enough. I've got practitioners in town. Anybody with a thyroid problem, the doctors are just like, oh, just don't see me. I don't. It's like, and ultimately, it's usually because it's more than just a thyroid problem, and there's also a little bit of sort of, I think, an elementary approach to thyroid issues. And so I see those folks, and I've got referral rates, regarding lots of infertility stuff. It's a pretty neat thing to not be the cause of, but be a part of a journey that somebody ends up having a baby. It's pretty exciting for them, and that's been a challenge. And so it's both motivating, but like I said, it's just a lot of referral, and it is a privately paid service. I try to add as much value to it as absolutely possible, but I also have to make it so that the subsequent recommendations, which are not always benefit prescriptions, that they can afford those too, right? And I always reflect on it. It's like, I do know there's functional medicine doctors and stuff, and they're wonderful, but it's like $2,000, like, it's nuts, right? And it's because there's lots of very interesting, very detailed privatized testing and diagnostics and things that can be done. I'm a pharmacist, though. I'm not a diagnostic specialist.
Right.
A lot of those tests, I feel, are not totally, some of them aren't totally validated. And I also think that in general, sometimes we're just taking this snapshot in time, right? We're not really taking a step back and going, okay, but who cares? What are we actually going to learn from this? And what's the intended intervention, and how does it work? Exactly. And at that point, I'm already not going to like this very specialized product. I'm looking at what are things that I can give to somebody that's going to help three areas. What's foundational to their health? What are things that are accessible? And because ultimately, that referral rate, if somebody goes, yeah, well, I mean, I was totally fixed up, but broke the bank, or it's totally inaccessible, then I'm never going to see anybody again. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because you mentioned quite a few interesting points, and I mean, obviously, I'm sure you have motivated some pharmacists, and this is where your extensive training comes into handy, right? Where you become the point of contact, even for practitioners, other practitioners in the community where you're practicing, to refer patients to you. But I think the value that you mentioned about, asking patients more probing questions, understanding their journey instead of that little snapshot of when they're presenting to you in the pharmacy. And I think that made that whole difference for that woman who you made that impact, that significant impact on, where you literally healed her to an extent, like in 2 months time frame, right? And that's no small feat. And you made pharmacy proud by being a representative of our profession. So thank you very much for that. And coming on to that, so what is some advice for pharmacists or potential owners who may be looking to implement similar personalized services, and potentially how can you assist them in terms of that implementation? A little bit on that would be great.
I in my pharmacy practice consulting, I was introduced to that whole realm by another couple wonderful mentors in pharmacy, and a couple of guys that basically said, if it's not sustainable, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
and rightly so, right? Like it's, if you are having to help in supporting the function of a pharmacy, if you are trying to keep people employed and keep the lights on, and my goodness, is pharmacy operations expensive. I mean, it's actually razor thin margins out there these days, and it is sad. So how are we going to do this, right? And it comes down to those sustainability models. I think it comes down to trial and error and trying to determine what people want. I always say it's like I offered free lecture series. So it's like people will pay money to come and see me individually. But if I'm like, let me teach you all about perimenopause, or let me teach you about PCOS or stress dysfunction, or it's like how people can have weight loss issues, right? And nobody shows up. So like if it's a free lecture, nobody shows up. And so you do have to kind of think about, how do you batch things? How do you batch sales and services? How do you look at what your actual existing business models are, right? If you're a pharmacy that is doing some compounding, there's always going to be a little bit of that personalization. And you will find that people who are looking for specialty knowledge will often require specialty products. And so pain consultations within a pharmacy, like a compounding pharmacy, amazing. And here in this province, like the Workers' Compensation Board and the Saskatchewan, like it's SGI, it's like our, if you get in a car accident and you're injured, they actually cover those usually privately paid pain compounds. And so, you can kind of do consultations that say, let's really truly help and track your pain. There may or may not be a fee associated with the time that we've developed here. Right. But for sure, that hour that you spent with my pharmacist that costs X amount of dollars is usually made up in the first compounding fee. Right. In addition to, we also talked about, like, the patient came in and they're like, oh, curcumin. I keep reading about this curcumin. That's what I want. I want to take it. I want you to tell me if I can. And so it's like, you're like, okay, so yes, you can. But I've also determined a company where the product is validated, where it's externally researched. It actually might be a little bit more expensive that way, but it for sure is going to have an efficacy that we can trust or track, and we'll do follow-up. So then, a little bit of batch sales that way. We do sales of DNA testing. Wow. There's lifestyle ones, there's pharmacogenetics. And so often patients that are dealing with like mental health, I think if you offered mental health consultations, really, truly, like, hey, let me kind of coach you, let me support you. Oftentimes, and we had a physician come into our pharmacy to talk about our antidepressant prescribing for major depression. He was just like, we got to be doing that. Yes. DMS for like every 10 days, and then it's like, if they've got no no improvement at all, you got to switch categories. Or if they've got 20-15% improvement in a couple of weeks, and we got to, crank the dose, like we've got to really watch these things. And so, if there's an opportunity to do, things that are very targeted, that's kind of the way to market it. And then you build around, okay, what does that look like for paired sales services, blah, blah, blah. Can I give them an immunization while they're here? Does that make sense? Stuff like that.
Fair enough. And I think, again, I think it also goes back to what you mentioned earlier on, which was, finding that passion and that inner motive and drive to be associated with that cause, so you can truly help your patients see the value, right? If they are actually paying for services out of pocket, because it's only when they see the value in something that they will actually be willing to, continually follow you and trust you and the advice that you provide, similar to what you mentioned. Like free webinars may not take the uptake that you're looking for.
People don't like free stuff, really.
Right? Because it's free, it's valuable, but again, not seeing the value because there's no value for me to, be there.
And there's been lots of conversations about that, about how free is not totally valued. And
it's not.
I think there's a piece I missed in empowering your employees.
Yes.
I know that it's like, now that I've been involved in sort of the hiring process and building a team and stuff, it's like I actually intimidate people with questions like, hey, if you want to like take lead on a project or like totally develop something from the ground up, like you just let me know. And they're like, what? I don't want to do that.
It's not what I'm used to.
Okay. Like, I'm sorry. That's, it's like, that's the kind of offer that I'd be like, oh, good. Because that's exactly what I want. Right. But find those people.
Yes.
Right. Find people and also understand, as I'm sure any business owner understands, that the first rendition usually fails and the second rendition usually fails. And you just kind of keep tweaking until you get to a space where you've made something that's sustainable. You've got a pharmacist or a clinician that's totally empowered. And, in any way, shape, or form that people can encourage and support and fund some of the continuing professional development. It is an investment that I think even if your staff don't stay long term, it just catalyzes the whole profession. You're doing a service to your community when you encourage the professional growth of your pharmacists. And technicians and everybody, right?
Agreed. And it's like the more knowledgeable your team is, the more comfortable they are with the services you provide, the more uptake they'll be able to be better able to pitch those services to the right people when the opportunity arises, right? Instead of if they're not prepared. Well, if you're never prepared, you're never going to propose, right? So
exactly.
But thank you so much, Amy. And I know, as I wrap up this conversation on your personalized services, I know that, we'll share your LinkedIn and your social media profiles along with this conversation. So if anybody is interested in reaching out to you and, availing your services and expertise, I would encourage you to do so. Amy has been, wonderfully innovative. I still remember the first conversation I heard that you had provided, which was the Pharmacy U presentation around this very own, hormone compounding, and you had really inspired me to, just have a peek at that. Even though I did not necessarily pursue it, it intrigued me, and I commend those kind of speakers because it's very hard to find that motivation and that passionate speaker. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge through this platform as well, because I'm sure somebody might be very interested in pursuing this forward, and you might just be the person they may be reaching out to.
And if I gotta make a plug at this time,
yes, go ahead.
I will. But technically, my company offers pharmacy, consulting packages for compounding and stuff like that. Obviously, NAPRA, it was like that was probably the right time to make a compounding support program. But I realized that sometimes these conferences and these conference series and stuff, they're not really accessible. And that's where I actually really prefer more of, in the same manner that I do my consulting with patients, I like to do that with individual pharmacists. So it's like, if you do have an interest in women's health, or you do have an interest in functional medicine, like I do offer training calls where it's like, let's just like talk candidly about this and really kind of empower, like here's the nitty gritty of all of my learnings, make sure you've got the consent forms, communications with physicians that are complicated, just that really, it's a very pharmacy use style conversation, right? Where it's a little bit more, instead of saying, here's all the physiology and here's all the references and the resources, because you will have to just develop those over time. It's more like, can I give you the big picture and answer the really hard questions for you first, so that you know what you're getting into, you know how to create a path for yourself that's going to be really successful and empowering.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you very much for sharing that, because, I think the service you provide through that, I think, is also very valuable, because the areas that you're an expert in, we not necessarily have very many experts. So if anyone is looking, especially in compounding, because I know it's one of those areas where it requires highly specialized skill set and experience and education, yet at the same time, we may not have that big of a network of experts that we can rely on. So I'm sure and certain that your services in that area as well would be very highly sought after. And I hope if anyone's listening, whoever's listening to this conversation, feel free to reach out to Amy if you're in this if you're interested in this practice in any of these areas, or if you have any questions around these areas, and see how you can potentially collaborate together. That said, I want to now move our conversation to the second part that you had earlier spoke about, which was your association, and now you have taken a role as a CEO at the Indigenous Pharmacy Professionals of Canada organization. I was there at the CPHA conference when this organization was unveiled, and the first time it was announced, at least to my knowledge. And first of all, I have to commend both you and Jarvis for taking on this incredible work, because it's so much needed. As somebody who is an immigrant into this country, I may not necessarily understand to be able to appreciate the challenges and the concerns, or even something as simple as the culture and the health philosophies of the Indigenous communities that exist in Canada. And I feel like the work that you will embark on through this organization will help not only pharmacy professionals but also patients that we serve as healthcare providers. And I guess I just want to hear a little bit more about that in terms of what is the focus of this organization, and what is the type of work that you're currently leading at this organization?
So and again, I'll start off with the tip of the cap to Dr. Jairus Vidrovich, who is the founder and now the sole chair. We were co-chairs of the organization when it was announced back at the CPHA conference. But his background to this was desperately seeking that community.
Yes.
Trying to find a space where his experiences and his ancestry could go hand in hand through this profession, and it was not available. And so it had always been sort of this missing piece, and I think sort of a true dream of his to create. And ultimately it was in CPHA reaching out and saying, I think we kind of, we know we need to go here. It's within this mandate, but they did an incredible service and an incredibly correct thing in doing something with Indigenous pharmacy professionals. And so they reached out to an Indigenous pharmacy professional, and to Jairus's credit, he was kind of the only one anyone knew about, which is, that poor guy has taken on the absolute breadth of educating sometimes extremely basic concepts to our pharmacy industry. And so he said to them, if you really want to do something for Indigenous patients, or indigenizing and creating a pharmacy profession that does not have anti-Indigenous racism pervasive within it, then we need to form this organization. And so they've been kind of just helping us honestly with like all the stuff that's really, really awful and annoying. And they're so wonderful in doing our administration and setting up emails and getting us a website and bringing us to the conference and allowing us to speak there. And CSHP invited us out to meetings with them and facilitated the first I hope, annual multilateral meeting of pharmacy bodies, which included, we had NAPRA, we had the Canadian Association of Pharmacy Technicians, we had the PEBC board, we had the residency board, we had the Association of Faculty of Pharmacy, CSHP. It was this multilateral meeting, and I hope I didn't miss anybody, but ultimately, we got to sit down all in one room and focus on this one issue, which is that the pharmacy profession realizes that, it is long past time for them to do that, but they want to do it right and not right now.
Yes.
And there's a really long-standing sort of statement in Indigenous communities and Indigenous health initiatives, which is, nothing about us without us.
Mm-hmm.
If we could potentially be included in those conversations, I think that actually does a lot to resolving them. The issues. And so community is a big piece of that. Being able to hear and share the stories of other Indigenous pharmacy professionals, that's pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and pharmacy assistants across Canada. We're looking at just kind of empowering their voices, empowering their resources, connecting them with other advocacy groups across the country. We meet regularly in an advisory circle with the Indigenous dentists and physicians and nurses associations, Indigenous Services Canada. We're launching a scholarship program, trying to, again, increase that overall representation, and then speaking with these pharmacy bodies and saying, okay, now how do we increase representation at leadership tables? Or how do we collaborate on at least the projects that matter here? Right. And my big piece, and obviously judging from my foundations as, a clinician or wherever, I think we got to work on safe workspaces, and I truly believe that, and in the same way that I discovered that the same type of approach that I was using for people who had extreme amount of privileges and could pay for the optimal best versions of health, that we can still distill those down into foundations for health. And that's what we need to be sharing in safety and healing spaces. Not only are respectful of the needs of Indigenous patients, but also the professionals. And I think everybody, we're all going to feel a lot better and a lot safer when we start to look at these more community-based approaches, this comprehensive story-based, increasing sort of a little bit of access to some of that vulnerability within ourselves and in our communities. And it's been a organization that has absolutely captured my heart, because you sit in lots of Zoom meetings these days, and some of them are pretty, they are what they are. But it is such a circle of a family of people, and it is that authenticity just emanates through those conversations, and there is vulnerability, and we are empowered, and we are strengthened in hearing each other's stories and each other's visions for health. And we can hold each other up through the challenges, because there's lots.
Absolutely. And thank you so much once again to both you and Joris, for leading this work, because I know there's a lot to be done. And I'm sure there's, just like myself, there's other members of the profession who may also be interested in kind of, understanding how can we contribute to this work, and what can we do to help support this mandate or this mission that you are, out to achieve, and would love to support you in any way, shape, or form we can. And, so if you could share a little bit about that, that would be great to for our listeners who are interested in joining this movement.
I think, inviting that diversity, inviting any diversity is really important to any of your tables and any of your podcasts. Isn't this lovely? But, ultimately, you need to make sure that representation is there. And sometimes that's hard, like we even had people say, hey, we don't even have enough pharmacists trying to be on our board, let alone how am I going to find an Indigenous pharmacist, and blah, blah, blah. Well, it's like, well, maybe it isn't an Indigenous pharmacist. Maybe it has to be a community member, but you do, public at large, targeted, do need to have kind of those discussions. And I'm always really Um, I'm always really encouraging of pharmacists to, I think, look at Indigenous health with the right lens.
Yes.
There's lots of really important statistics, and I've actually even been caught, you know, in a moment where it's like I'm expressing the statistics of how, you know, there's 4% of the population of women or people in Canada are Indigenous women, but that's 40% of who's in jail. But the reason why that is has to be explained over the statistics, because the inherent biases behind, oh, well, they're more diabetic and they have more addictions and they have more HIV and more of these just horrible consequences, it kind of plays into this misunderstanding and this bias. And ultimately the language that we need to choose is that it's like, these are incredibly strong people, but they have been horribly systemically harmed.
Yes, unfortunately.
And that systemic harm is putting a ton of pressure on healthcare. And that's why, you know, often, you know, there's even conversations, and I actually think that you, being an immigrant to Canada, I think you at least understand from a biopic status some of the experiences, right? Like, you may have a much broader perspective than somebody who's been a longstanding Canadian as to the challenges that are faced by Indigenous communities. But, you know, ultimately, we just really need to start looking at this from a context of it is going to make in making safe spaces for Indigenous communities and addressing these inequities, we're all better served by it. Because I truly believe that it's like the indignities faced by our communities walk right through our front door. You know, healthcare providers and teachers and the policemen and everybody's experiencing it. And so we have to both work from like a healthcare advocacy and as pharmacists, but you know, some of the best work that I've done to help my patients, my Indigenous patients, is actually volunteering for nonprofit organizations that serve vulnerable populations. And I think that that's both an experience that pharmacists across jurisdictions could really delve into. But it really helps in supporting your client base. But it's avoiding those stigmas. It's recognizing the greater context of things. It's recognizing the importance, you know, in lots of different policies, but certainly health policies in sometimes having to focus on what seems like, isn't that just one group of people? Like, you know, like we have lots of crises going on. Why should we be focusing on one group of people? And I really do distill it down to, I think when we create better systems that address these incredible harms, that we're all going to, I think, you know, we're going to see that all vulnerable people are going to do a whole heck of a lot better. And so, it's looking around and asking those questions. It's a lot of it's awareness and just, you know, an appropriate lens for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that, because that's, you know, I guess I was kind of ignorant about the issues that were pertaining, especially to our Indigenous friends here in Canada. And, you know, I was not really aware of, like, you know, what exactly was going on, because part of it is also because our educational curriculum, even in pharmacy school, does not necessarily focus a lot. I remember there was one optional class that if we wanted to take it on Indigenous health in my entire 4 years of pharmacy education. And, you know, that doesn't necessarily make it enough that you would understand all the different complexities and the history and everything else that has kind of taken place to be where we are today, right? And with that in mind, I'm always curious and always willing to learn in terms of, you know, any resources that you wish to highlight which would help expand our understanding or of Indigenous health philosophies as well as approaches to healthcare, and what is it that we can do as healthcare providers to create those safe spaces that you had mentioned about, you know, in our own pharmacies or own workplaces, even, because workplace could be anywhere too, but we also need to create those safe places there too.
You know, it would be distilling it down, you know, quite a bit, but you know, there are the truth and reconciliation calls to action. Right. Those are actionable items that residential school survivors re-traumatize themselves to go over and decide, you this is what we're asking of Canadians. And there are some that probably don't apply to all pharmacists or all pharmacies or all individuals, but it is worth reviewing. And then Indigenous ways of knowing, and ultimately what the intention of IPPC will be is to start integrating that knowledge in a way that is safe. Because again, sometimes it's the interpretation of it. But if I was really to say to someone who is a practicing pharmacist, it's like, what's the best thing that you could do for your Indigenous patients? It's listen. Okay. It's just listen without judgment, and give them the space and time, and actually go through some really uncomfortable situations and some really uncomfortable scenarios, because ultimately you might go through a moment where someone is going to accuse you of racially profiling them, accuse you of systemically harming them, and ultimately I've had to navigate those myself. I'm a fairly white presenting Métis woman, really well intentioned, but you know what, sometimes NIHB seems pretty racist, and sometimes pharmacy policies seem kind of prejudiced, and we just have to literally sit there and sometimes accept it, and allow somebody to express their frustrations. And then ultimately, when somebody's coming in and they're getting prescriptions or they're getting health advice, ask them what did you go in there for? Just do that really a little bit better depth patient care, where you're actually hearing about what motivates that person, what their limitations are, right? I've got a colleague who uses the example too, where she was just like, you get somebody on the perfect, you could design them the perfect diabetic insulin regimen, and then they tell you they're homeless. So it's like, where are they going to store it? Have we asked actually the pertinent questions, or did we just ask about their drug and disease related factors, when it is the true understanding of anybody who's done any study into trauma informed practice and culturally appropriate practice, that it's the environment in which that person and that community is existing. And this is where it's the advocacy piece. So before being invited on to be co-chair of IPPC, I was traveling out to remote Indigenous communities and going, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare. And it's a nightmare because we've actually got regulations that make it a total nightmare. And then there are some just total physical barriers. And it is truly and honestly incredible health inequity. We're trying to talk to patients and, again, stigmatizing, well, you have a higher risk of diabetes. Well, if I lived in a community that only had a gas station, and that was the only thing that was accessible to me for 45 minutes without a vehicle, and I don't have equitable access to employment to get myself a vehicle to go and get some lettuce,
exactly,
then I'm probably going to eat a chocolate bar for lunch,
Exactly.
And that's, I just, there's been times where I'm like, of course there's diabetes here. And of course it's really difficult to control. And then you factor in how, we all experience that hangry moment after a major stressful incident, right?
We do.
Well, imagine chronic, intergenerational, racial and systemic stressors all day long. And then, Indigenous people are deeply connected to each other. And so there is just lateral experiential going on all the time. There was a little boy that was lost in one of the communities that I went to, and he was eventually found, he fell into a river. It was horrible. But for months, that entire community was in absolute disarray and chaos and grieving. And I mean, at that point, managing their medications it's
not a priority.
Pretty much an afterthought. It's like, put on your muck boots and go help them try and find this kid.
Exactly.
There is a greater context to understanding that these are completely different environments, totally systemically imposed, and the lack of control is devastating.
Right.
And we have to find as many ways to empower that as possible. So, bringing out, I've got a virtual doc in a box, bring that out, and max next level of that pharmacist-led kind of health clinic. I've been
Yes.
doing that for a long time. As much as I can prescribe here, I'll try and get a hold of your doctor. We'll do all of that thing. We're going to try to come up with systems where we're providing as much communication to you as possible. We hired in technicians or assistants from the communities that we serve, ideally finding somebody that speaks Cree or Dene or what, if you're really truly working with the community,
Yes.
then you should include one of their family members,
Absolutely.
Include somebody who can all of a sudden create a pharmacy space that feels a little bit more like home, because now it's safe. Now it's a place that they trust, and now it's starting to navigate a real true path of being able to collaborate on healing together.
Got it. Thank you very much, Amy, for sharing that, because, definitely I think a lot of food for thought and afterthought as well, in terms of for an opportunity for us to reflect as individuals, to see, how there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think as many hands as we can have on deck to address a lot of these inequities. There's never going to be enough hands. And I think we should all play our parts in doing what we can in our capacity in any way, shape, or form. I'd be happy to help in any way I can to at least help promote this vision, but also, and how can I contribute back to this organization to help support this work? That said, a question in terms of identifying as a Métis woman for yourself. How did you find your journey to becoming a pharmacist? And even after you became a pharmacist, were there any barriers or challenges you faced in terms of how you were able to get into pharmacy school, or the challenges you may have faced as you were going through pharmacy school, or even as a pharmacist once you started practicing?
I think for lack of a better term, assimilated for a very long time. And I have the inherent privileges to be able to do that. And I've had lots of, health consequences that I think are fairly inequitable and trauma-based and blah, blah, blah. But it was not feeling that there was a space for my authenticity, for my depths, that has been really hard. I find that the pharmacy profession is very rigid, and it can be incredibly stifling. Like I honest to goodness, if I get put in creative roles, like I just start to suffocate, because there's almost like a fear of what I'm bringing, because it's very that connection and that depth and that authenticity and that vulnerability is so important to my healing and to my connectivity with my communities. And I ultimately, if I'm somebody who's influenced by my environment, like I said, my professional journey has had to really think about, ooh, this place feels a little dangerous. I'm not feeling really good at the end of the day. And if I'm not feeling really good at the end of the day, then I haven't shared that with anybody. And I truly believe that, take away my degree, take away my credentials, just like honestly give me a full frontal lobotomy. I give some light to some people. I've worked in really busy pharmacies where you're doing no good, right? Like you're just like, we're just passing through. But
you're on a packaging line.
If we can just stop for 2 seconds and just say, hey, how you doing? And be really warm and really kind to somebody, then I've given them a good customer service experience today,
Agreed.
And it's really hard. I find it really hard to practice that way. And so, I ended up having, like I said, I've had a lot of opportunities and a lot of interests, and, I don't know, I'm sure most of them are out of privilege, that I've ended up into spaces where I've been able to protect and reserve that function. But, it's hard. And that's why I always kind of, I love to be a part of the dispensary world, and I love to be a part of teams, and I love to be included in this whole world. And I love pharmacists, and I really truly believe in pharmacists and the compassionate, incredible professionals they are, and they're all so smart. And I just know that I have to kind of do my own thing a lot of the time. You know,
Abs-
I gotta kind of, I gotta kind of blaze my own trails because everybody's a little scared, a little scared of what I bring to the table. Sometimes it's a bit too, you know, it is. I'm asking people to grieve with me. You know,
Absolutely.
sometimes, you know, there's a lot to be grieving for, you know, post pandemic, after
Yes.
the findings in residential schools, you know, just the changes in our society, the opioid crises and the addictions crises, and everybody's waning mental health. I mean, there is a
Yes.
huge paradigm shift that has to happen, and a lot of people would rather just kind of skim along and not kind of dig into it. And
Yes.
I really like to. And so it's an important consideration when you bring an Indigenous person into your group and
Mm.
at your tables, is that they're gonna say some really uncomfortable stuff sometimes. And we don't, you know, it's like I don't mean to make people uncomfortable, but I do believe in sometimes just asking for a little bit more and
Yes.
challenging, and just sort of expressing myself, and the counterbalance to all that grief and fear is the beauty and creation that we
Yes.
can have from facilitating deeper connections with each other
Mhm.
in this industry and deeper connections with our patients.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I could not, say it any better than you have. I feel like, yes, there's that discomfort that needs to be initially addressed. And I feel like
Yeah.
we all need to experience that discomfort because, this has been faced by the Indigenous communities for years and generations. And it's for us to even have an iota of understanding of that grief and that pain, we need to be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
because that uncomfort is not even, percentage of what the community has gone through or the communities have gone through. But I think this dialogue is very important. Thank you very much for sharing that, Amy, because, the next time I come across an Indigenous person, at least now I know how to have those conversations, right? And oftentimes one thing that sometimes we do not do a good job at is listening. And you mentioned that as to be able to just listen, to give them that space so that they can share their side of the story. And I feel like there's a lot more we can learn by listening rather than kind of trying to fix the problems, which this world is so geared to do. Is, we identify something and we just want to, how do I pull this? How do I fit this plug so it does not leak anymore? But it's not
Yeah.
about that, right? It's more about just listen, understand what the person or the community's needs are, and then see how we can work together to address those needs rather than trying
Yeah.
to dictate or trying to, use solutions that are used somewhere else, but may not necessarily be the best fit to the problem that we're seeing today. Thank you very much, Amy, for that. And, with that, I would also like to ask for one advice that younger
Mm.
Amy would have, now that you're reflecting back on your journey. And, what was one advice that you would have given yourself, your younger self, when you embarked on this journey to becoming a pharmacist? And I think that advice would also resonate with a lot of other pharmacy students, but even for pharmacists who are finding themselves in that uncomfortable space or that unsafe space that you so described aptly in terms of, not being able to express their selves, their authentic selves.
Mhm.
Any advice?
You know, the one thing I will reflect on afterwards is that I wouldn't change a damn thing.
Yes.
I really wouldn't, mostly because the growth that comes with the hard times and the mistakes and the wrong trajectory before you get, your course cited, and the fact that you got to keep changing and changing.
Yes.
I wouldn't change a thing because I really truly feel that I am on the other side of something that that needed every inch of it.
Mm.
Having said that, and this is not a harsh judgment of pharmacists, but my goodness, stand up for yourself, people.
I agree.
Yeah, there's everywhere, not
Yes.
just in your workplaces. Both of my parents are business owners. I grew up seeing just the traumas that poor business owners go through. I've now been highly involved in the operations and hiring and finances of a community pharmacy, these razor thin margins.
Yes.
And, you feel bad for employers. So, I mean, I absolutely do. But, if you feel bad for your employer and they're a good person who's just having to put you through rough circumstances, then you got to go the next level up. And then you got to go
Yes.
the next level up, and you're going to write your MLA, and you got to go to City Hall, and you got to present about these things. And you need to, include some of that professional and personal development for yourself. Like,
Yes.
Leadership training is something that's really, really, I think, a core competency that we don't have enough of. Self-care is a core competency that we don't have enough of. And if we took the time, even as an industry, or if somebody allowed us, or somehow, made it sustainable for us to have personal and professional development time, so that we can become more effective team members, effective leaders, efficient workers, more caring and compassionate professionals, so that we can deal with some of those demons that happen when we go back home after a stressful day, as opposed to, just carrying forward resentments and stuff, because life and pharmacy is hard.
Yes.
It's going to be that way. But I really, truly hope that people take a nod of what their own personal journey needs, and recognize that personal and professional journey are absolutely conjoined at the hip, and that when one is struggling, the other's going to carry it forward. But ultimately, they're both going to advance together, if you nurture them both.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Amy. I think that was definitely a great piece of advice, a wake-up call, if I may say so, because I feel like, we're at that crossroads as a profession where a lot of additional responsibilities are coming on to us as a profession. And I think now is a great time to reconfigure and kind of, see what does our ideal practice look like, and then maybe work towards that practice instead of trying to succumb to the pressure that you may be feeling, and having those honest conversations, right, in a very respectful way. And establishing those conversations, I think, is key to making sure that we're able to work with employers that we see a common vision or a goal with. And, I commend you to be one of those leaders who actually provide such opportunities to your team members. And I encourage all other employers who are out there listening, make sure that you involve your staff, your frontline, into those decisions, because they are the ones who are directly impacted by them too, right? With that said, I'm going to wrap up this interview without forgetting our last question, which is, how do you see the future of pharmacy in the next 5 to 10 years?
Like pharmacist-led walk-in clinics of any design. I don't, it's like we saw a whole bunch in the news this week. Loblaws and Shoppers opened a few, and they looked really much like they look like a clinic. And I was like, honestly, you could do that without building a clinic. You could probably just run it out of your counseling room. But either way, awesome. Yes. I see that. I see that in some of the paired and point of care testing. Like, I see there being just this whole evolution there. I see people and this whole paradigm shift. Like, we had 8 pharmacy students at our pharmacy this year.
Wow.
And they all kind of get the boundaries thing and the self-care thing. Like, it's a whole new generation, and they've been like, I'm working half from home, I'm really stressed out, it's like I gotta prepare myself. And I've had to look into these things because I'm anxious and not feeling like a normal human being. And I think that health coaching, it sometimes feels like it might not be a clinical practice, but I promise you it is. It's the framework that surrounds an incredibly satisfying clinical practice. And ultimately, I think that it's, there's something to be said for the development and the initiatives that are going on when it comes to vulnerable communities and vulnerable populations. I see collaborative health clinics that are harm reduction. We've got prairie harm reduction in Saskatchewan here. So harm reduction clinics that I think that we can bring in those coaching and community things, the partnerships with nonprofit organizations and health authorities and pharmacies, right? Because as part of all of these programming, there's dispensables. So instead of that being an expense to a program, why can't it just be a partnership with the pharmacy?
Exactly.
Métis buses. I've got like a million ideas. And I just think, we need to bring we need to bring compassionate and effective healthcare to the crisis centers, and we need to make it wrap around and safe, and include a meal and a warm place to, write a resume or something.
Right.
It's all part and parcel, and I think that pharmacists are absolutely poised to make those partnerships. And I see now, having operated a pharmacy, just how important those partnerships could be to the sustainability of our brick and mortar spaces, where we do hire and we do employ pharmacy assistants from all walks of life, and pharmacy technicians that are absolutely leading the change, and these incredible compassionate pharmacists that are going to they're gonna fix things, and I'm a dreamer. But I think, honestly, this whole health collapse and crisis that is pretty imminent, it's got to be at least something we can help with. But we just have to make a little bit of a shift in the role there. So the innovation sector, the mechanics, it's like, we got a machine coming, because it's going to just pack a whole bunch of stuff. But then really, truly, that's not replacing somebody. That's replacing totally like mind-numbing, redundant stuff.
Exactly.
That is if you can make enough partnerships to invest in it, then wow, now we can actually go out to whatever community or whatever facility is getting just packed meds. And we get a chance to actually connect with them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for painting such an optimistic and a bright future for our profession. Similar to you, I'm like super excited in terms of, where we're heading. And as you rightly mentioned, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Technology is a support and in terms of a supportive equipment, but it's never going to replace us. And I feel like the challenges we have in front of us are way more that needs our human side more than it ever has required. And pharmacists are well equipped to deliver to those needs, and I really look forward to the amazing work you'll be leading at IPPC, but also at Lamb and Sage, and also at your current role. I'm really looking forward to all the incredible work that will be coming out. And if there's ever anything that I can do, feel free to reach out at any point. And I encourage our audience to also check out and reach out to Amy in terms of, if you're interested in working with IPPC in any way, shape, or form, volunteering your time there, or in any other, if you have any questions for Amy, we'll be linking it down below. So please feel free to reach out through that. And with that, Amy, thank you very much for your time today and these amazing insights. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care, my dear.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.